The galaxy is busy and alive. Different alien civilizations grow, trade, and fight. But Earth is missing. No signal, no humans. Aliens whisper stories in secret. Humans just disappeared. No one knows how. No wars, no goodbyes. One day, Earth was silent. The viewer meets a curious alien historian named Verex, a member of the Varn Empire. He discovers a hidden signal, an old human broadcast buried deep in a quiet part of space. The message says, "We gave, we warned, we watched, now we leave." The tension builds. What happened to Earth? Why did humans vanish? What did they mean by "we warned"? The galaxy was never silent. From the beginning, stars burned with life, and countless civilizations spoke across the void. They traded, they argued, they formed empires. And through it all, there was one voice they had all heard, respected, and sometimes feared: humanity. But one day, that voice was gone. No war, no farewell, no sign of destruction. Earth had simply vanished. Across the stars, silence spread like a shadow. The systems closest to Earth noticed it first. Trade signals stopped. Exploration vessels sent to check on Earth never returned. Then came the rumors. Some said the humans had ascended to a higher form. Others believed they had destroyed themselves quietly. But the strangest story was whispered among scholars and long-lived species. Humanity didn't fall. They walked away. Verex, a historian from the Varn Empire, never believed in ghost tales. He studied records, archives, anything that remained of Earth's presence. But one day, deep in the archives of a forgotten satellite near the border of Terran space, he found something. An old transmission, hidden behind layers of encryption. It wasn't addressed to anyone in particular. It was just there. The message began with static. Then a calm, human voice spoke. "We gave, we warned, we watched. Now we leave." There was no name, no explanation. But Verex knew what he had found. This was the last human message ever sent. He took the data back to his ship. As soon as he activated the file, strange things started to happen. The lights on his vessel flickered. Ancient communication devices, unused for decades, turned on by themselves. And outside the ship, stars that had been steady for centuries, pulsed once then went dark. He reported it to the Galactic Union, but most dismissed it as an error. Old tech behaving badly, they said. Too much time spent near the Terran systems. But some listened. A few older species, who remembered Earth's kindness and strength, sent out quiet probes. Some vanished. Some returned with distorted recordings. All of them carried strange patterns in their data, like echoes from a voice that wasn't speaking anymore. Verex wasn't satisfied. He knew something had begun the moment he played that message. So he went further. He visited abandoned human colonies. Most were stripped bare, but always clean, like the people had packed up and left without panic. On one planet, he found a small garden still growing. Automated drones moved silently, tending it even now, decades after the last human had stood there. Everywhere he looked, he found the same feeling: calm, not fear, not defeat, just silence. But the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy. Watching back in the Varn Empire, things started to go wrong. Ships powered by old human technology began to fail. Navigation systems spun out of control. Entire reported hearing strange sounds like voices speaking from old radios in forgotten languages. And then, a moon disappeared. One moment, it was their home to millions of settlers. The next, gone. Not destroyed, not exploded. Just no longer part of space. A signal was found at the last known location. It was short. 4 words. Silence was a gift. Panic spread. Some believed the humans had left behind a weapon. Others thought it was a warning. Verex believed it was something else. He believed the silence was not punishment, it was a choice. He returned to his study of the last message, played it over and over, slowed it down, ran it backward, and finally, he heard something buried beneath the voice. A pulse, a pattern, coordinates. They pointed to a dark part of space, one that had been marked as unstable centuries ago by human explorers. No one had gone there since. It was called the Still Zone. Verex knew he had to go. Alone, if necessary. That as he prepared to leave, he uploaded the message and the coordinates to the Union network. "If I don't return," he said, "then know this. Humanity didn't leave because they were weak. They left because they saw something we didn't. With that, his ship turned toward the silent part of the stars. Far across the galaxy, other things began to stir. Machines from lost times activated. A massive satellite once built by humans blinked awake, and a single line of code spread through forgotten systems. We stepped away so you could stand. And still, no one knew what had truly made humanity leave, and what would happen now that their silence was broken. But one thing was certain, the stars were no longer quiet. The galaxy had always moved forward, technology expanding, civilizations rising, and old records becoming myths. But after the human disappearance, something had changed. Not just in space, but in the way people felt. Something quiet had begun to echo, as if the absence of humanity had left behind not emptiness, but a presence. Verex floated near the edge of the still zone, where the coordinates from the last message pointed. This part of space had been abandoned for centuries. The stars here flickered strangely, and the usual signals bounced back, distorted. The deeper his ship moved into the zone, the less reality felt stable. It was as if space itself didn't want to be observed. He activated his scanners but found nothing. No planets, no debris, no light. But the moment he switched on the Terran transmission again, everything changed. A pulse ran through the ship. Not damage, more like a memory. The systems didn't fail, they paused, as if they were listening. Then a new signal appeared. Weak, almost broken. But it was human, in design. Verex followed it. Floating in the middle of the void was an old Terran station, rusted but whole. There were no life signs, no lights. But as Verex docked, the station came alive on its own, recognizing the visitor. Inside, it was quiet, no damage, no bodies. The halls still held the echo of footsteps long gone. On the main console, a single file blinked. Project Dusk. He opened it. What he saw changed everything. Humanity had not left in defeat or sadness. They had left with intention. Project Dusk had been their final act, a decision to remove Earth not just physically but from the galaxy's awareness. They didn't erase themselves with force. They folded their presence out of time into a state where only fragments could remain. But why? The records spoke clearly. Humanity had seen what was coming. A technological growth spreading too fast, across too many species, without wisdom. Civilizations copying Terran science, but not their responsibility. The galaxy had started to race toward collapse power without control. So, Earth chose to disappear. They called it a quiet correction. A way to remove their influence and give the galaxy a chance to grow on its own. And then came the warning. If the path continues unchecked, the silence will speak again. Verex leaned back. He couldn't believe it. Earth wasn't lost. They were hidden, watching, measuring the galaxy's response to their absence. And signs were already appearing. Across multiple systems, ancient Earth satellites were reactivating. Some sent simple messages, others just played sounds, old Earth music, radio shows, even laughter. The strangest message came from a small station near the edge of the Union. We left behind no weapons, only reminders. But one civilization didn't believe it. The Yellari, a proud species who had once tried to match Earth's innovation, declared the human disappearance a deception. They believed humanity had built something to control the galaxy from the shadows. They wanted access to whatever Earth had left behind, and they were willing to take it. They sent a fleet into the still zone. None returned. Only one signal came back, for seconds of static. Then the voice of a child whispering, "Not yet." Verex warned the Union, but most were still unwilling to accept that humanity had planned this. Some called it fear. Others called it wisdom. A few believed it was something more, a message that true strength comes from choosing when not to act. As Verex left the station, he looked back one last time. In the darkness beyond, he saw something move, a shimmer in the shape of Earth, visible to the eye, but present. Watching back on his ship, the data from Project Dusk began to change. New information appeared, fragments of logs, journals from humans during the final days before the silence. One entry stood out. "We taught, we warned, we stepped away. Not because we gave up, but because we believed you could rise or fall. It is your choice now." The ship's lights dimmed. Space outside returned to normal. The still zone faded from view, but Verex knew it was still there. He had only seen a piece of the truth. Whatever humanity had become, it was something beyond understanding. They had not vanished. They had transformed, and they were still listening. Asterisk. There was a growing sense across the stars something had shifted, and it was no longer just a mystery about the humans. It had become something deeper. Entire civilizations began to feel the weight of their absence. Trade routes fell quiet. Political councils postponed their meetings. Even the most confident empires grew uneasy. Varex, now back from the still zone, carried with him information few others had ever seen. Project Dusk was no myth. Humanity had not only chosen to leave, but had planned for what would happen after they were gone. And what was happening now was exactly what they expected. He returned to the central library on Varn Prime, the heart of his empire's knowledge. There, he began to study records that most had forgotten. Files on human inventions, treaties, and warnings that had once been dismissed as overly cautious, but those warnings now felt like predictions. Long ago, humans had cautioned the galaxy about fast-growing technologies, those that could reshape planets, bend energy, and mimic consciousness. But no one listened. Earth had offered guidance, shared ideas carefully, but many species copied them without understanding. What humanity took centuries to master, others tried to control in decades. Varex read a human speech from over 300 years ago. It ended with a haunting line. It's not what you hold in your hands that matters, but what you hold in your heart. At the time, leaders laughed at the sentiment. Now, they couldn't explain the systems breaking down, the machines malfunctioning, or the strange behaviors of copied human AI. Technology that had once lifted empires was now acting, confused. Some ships refused to respond to commands. In one case, an entire space station changed course on its own, to avoid a collision that hadn't even happened yet. And scattered among all this chaos, messages continued to appear. Some were poetic, the stars remember who spoke last. Others felt like instructions, return what was taken, restore what was broken. But the most alarming ones were personalized. Leaders, scientists, even merchants received messages on their private systems lines only they would understand, secrets only humans could have known. Varex wasn't the only one investigating now. Across the galaxy, researchers, skeptics, and even old enemies of Earth began to search for answers. A few found pieces of information that changed them forever. One such piece came from a deep vault on Zorith 7, a planet that once tried to compete with Earth's technology. Inside, they found a dormant AI with human coding. When reactivated, it spoke only one sentence. The test was never ours, it was yours. The AI shut down again. Nothing could bring it back. Varex connected the pieces. Earth hadn't just warned the galaxy. They had set a path, a quiet test, not to see who was strongest, but who would choose wisdom over power, and most had failed already. Meanwhile, small signs of human presence began to surface in places no one expected. On a moon once believed to be untouched, explorers found ancient human footprints preserved in a way that defied nature. On another world, they discovered trees genetically matched to Earth's oldest forests. And then came Solara. She wasn't alive, but she wasn't just a machine either. She appeared as a holographic woman, calm, patient, and made entirely from human code. She introduced herself as a guide, not a guardian, not a weapon. A guide. Solara explained that before Earth stepped away, they left behind fragments, echoes of thought and purpose. She was one of them. Her purpose, to help others understand why humanity had chosen silence. Varex asked the question everyone had been wondering. Will humanity ever return? Solara smiled gently. We never left. Not truly. We simply stepped beyond reach, until you were ready to see differently. See what? He asked. That strength is not control. That presence is not dominance. That growth is not always loud. The message was clear. Humanity hadn't disappeared to punish anyone. They left to give others the chance to grow without leaning on Earth, or misusing what Earth had offered. But now, the galaxy had reached a turning point. Systems were falling apart, not because humans took something with them, but because those systems were never meant to stand on stolen foundations. And while many looked for humans in the stars, Varex realized something more important. Perhaps they were never meant to find Earth again. Perhaps they were supposed to find themselves first. He returned to his ship with one thought echoing louder than any warning. The galaxy didn't lose humanity. It was being given the chance to understand why it had ever needed them. Varex stood before the Council of Species, the grand assembly of the galaxy's leaders. All eyes were on him, some skeptical, some nervous, and a few clearly afraid. He had shared the findings from the still zone. the truth about Project Dusk, and the strange return of old human echoes. The reaction was not unity, it was division. Some believed him. Others said it was myth wrapped in old tech. But none could ignore what was happening across the galaxy. Systems powered by copied human designs were still failing. Ancient data archives were reawakening with unknown protocols. New stars were charted only to vanish the next day. The galaxy had begun to feel like a puzzle one humanity had walked away from, leaving a few hidden pieces behind. And then, something unexpected happened. A tiny, nearly forgotten race, known as the Kalin, sent out a universal message. It was short, clear, and impossible to ignore. We remember, and we were told to tell you. When the silence begins to echo, the Kalin were peaceful, quiet, and often overlooked. But what no one realized was that long ago, centuries before Project Dusk, humanity had trusted them with something no other species received. The truth. Varex traveled to the Kalin homeworld, a small forest-covered moon far from the central trade lanes. He was welcomed not as a hero, but as a student. The Kalin didn't speak loudly. Their leaders gathered in a quiet circle and shared their history. They had met humanity during its final age, not Earth's decline, but its transformation. Back then, humans were changing, not just in science, but in soul. They had realized something deep. The galaxy was growing too fast, like a forest catching fire, and Earth, being one of the oldest flames, needed to step back before everything burned. So the humans made a pact with the Kalin. We will leave, they had said, not because we are defeated, but because we must not interfere. If they listen, they'll find their way. If they don't, they were not ready. The Kalin were tasked with remembering. They were given symbols, patterns, and stories, not weapons or commands, but wisdom. When the galaxy grew too loud and the echoes of Earth began to return, the Kalin would speak, and now they had. They gave Varex a sealed archive, unlocked only by ancient Terran keys. Inside were dozens of short logs, personal messages from humans before they left. One spoke of compassion. We helped, even when they didn't ask, even when they forgot to say thank you. Another spoke of warning. They will not understand our silence, not at first, but in time, they might understand their noise. And one, more recent than the rest, felt almost like it had been written for now. We saw that they wanted power, not responsibility. But one day, someone will ask why the stars no longer feel warm, and that question will begin everything. Var realized these were not commands, they were seeds. The Kalin explained that humanity had not vanished. They had evolved beyond what the galaxy knew, not in body, but in purpose. And they had left reminders behind, not to lead, but to guide from a distance. Some of those reminders were still hidden in forgotten places. Some had already been found, but misunderstood. Others had been destroyed by those too eager to rewrite history. Meanwhile, other signs began to appear. A long-dead star suddenly came back to life, but glowed in strange patterns, spelling characters across its light spectrum. A small probe entered the outer rim of the Kaleri system, broadcasting old Earth lullabies, the kind sung to children long before humanity even reached space. But it was what happened next that truly shook the galaxy. The Kalin vanished, not from war, not from attack. Their cities were still standing, their machines still moved, but the people were simply gone. A final message played across all their systems. The first voice has been passed. Listen well. The next voice will not be ours. The council blamed Varex. They said his search had awakened something dangerous, but he knew it wasn't danger. It was transition. The Kalin had fulfilled their role. Now the galaxy had to decide: follow the echo or ignore it. In the days that followed, the stars seemed quieter, not because sound had stopped, but because meaning had changed. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt full of memory, of messages, and of meaning that few dared to fully understand. Varex uploaded the Kalin archive to every public system. He knew most would dismiss it. Some would even try to delete it, but a few would listen. He returned to his ship, where Solaroid, the human-coded guide. She didn't ask what he had learned. She already knew. You've seen the truth now, she said. Yes, he replied. But why didn't they teach us? Why did they leave it all to chance? Solara's voice softened. Because real growth isn't given, it's chosen. And with that, Varex prepared for what came next. Earth hadn't left clues to be worshipped. They had left choices. And now, the galaxy was standing on the edge of a decision, one that would define whether the silence continued. or was broken forever. Varix had traveled farther than any historian before him, not in distance, but in understanding. He had seen the quiet corners where humanity once walked, heard the messages hidden behind their silence, and witnessed a galaxy beginning to tremble under the weight of its forgotten lessons. But nothing had prepared him for what came next. A sudden transmission reached the Galactic Union. It did not come through known channels. It bypassed every firewall, every security filter. It simply appeared on every screen, every speaker, across thousands of systems at the exact same time. The image was soft, not threatening. A planet appeared, surrounded by a strange blue shimmer. It was Earth, but it wasn't the Earth anyone remembered. There were no lights, no orbiting satellites, no signs of war, pollution, or noise. It looked untouched, almost reborn. Clouds moved slowly over green continents. Oceans reflected unfamiliar stars. Yet the shape was the same. It was Earth, but changed on. Then, a voice. "You are not lost, but you must now find your way without us." That was all. The transmission ended, and no one could trace its source. It left behind no code, no signal trail, no explanation. But it was enough. The Union called an emergency gathering. Debates broke out. Was it real? Was it a simulation? Had humanity returned, or was this a warning? Varix remained silent. He watched, he listened, and quietly, he knew. This was not a return. It was a mirror. He studied the footage of the planet frame by frame. Hidden within the blue shimmer were pattern symbols, matching those in the Kalin archives. The shimmer wasn't just energy. It was protection. Earth had not simply vanished. Had sealed itself behind a kind of cosmic barrier. A field of intention. Not force. Solara confirmed it. "That is Earth," she said, "but not as you knew it. It is no longer part of your time. It exists in a waiting place." Varix asked what she meant. Earth did not leave because it was afraid. It left because it believed the galaxy needed silence to grow. But now, the galaxy has reached a turning point. The silence is ending, and a new voice may be heard. Varix asked the question forming in everyone's mind. Will they come back? Solara tilted her head. They never left. They became something else. She guided Varix to a new location in charted space beyond the Orion Fold. What he found there was not a city, not a weapon, but a garden, floating in the vacuum of space. A structure made of light and living material, holding plants from dozens of worlds, Earth among them. It was tended not by machines, but by beings, not humans, not aliens, something in between. They looked like echoes of humanity, familiar features, human posture, but their eyes held galaxies. They moved with purpose, without noise. They didn't speak, yet Varix understood them. They were the next step, a blend of humanity's essence and something new, a creation of patience, wisdom, and deep observation. They had been grown, not built, not born of power, but of intention. One approached Varix and placed a hand over his chest. "You seek truth, not control," it said, not in sound, but in thought. "So you are allowed to see." The being showed him a vision not of war, not of dominance, but of harmony. Earth had become a sanctuary, a place where the mistakes of the past were studied, not repeated, a place where energy did not harm, but healed, where choices were made not by fear, but by balance. And Earth was no longer alone. Other planets, once unknown, had begun to glow the same way. They were forming a network, not a government, not an empire, but a presence, quiet, calm, unshakable. Varix asked why the galaxy wasn't told. "You were," the being replied, "but you listened for power, not for peace." Back on his ship, Varix tried to send this discovery to the Union. The transmission failed. Solara explained, "This knowledge cannot be forced. Only those who choose the path of quiet learning can see it." But there was one final message. It played across the 8 stars for those willing to hear it. "We offered light, but never chased shadows. We shared wisdom, but never demanded belief. Now, we step further, so you may step forward. The stars are yours. Use them kindly." And then, Earth disappeared, again not in destruction, but in stillness. The shimmer faded. No trace remained. Only a feeling. Hope. Rex knew then that the galaxy had not been abandoned. It had been trusted, and that trust came with responsibility. The silence of humanity had not been empty. It was full of guidance, waiting to be discovered. And now, the stars were watching not to punish, but to see who would rise with wisdom. not just strength. For the first time in ages, the galaxy was truly alone, but it was not without direction. The galaxy had grown quieter, but not in fear. This time, the silence felt different, like the stillness before a new sunrise. Civilizations that once raced toward power had begun to pause, to question, to look inward. Across the stars, the echoes of humanity were no longer treated as mysteries, but as mirrors. Varix had returned to the Van homeworld. He stood in the great hall of archives, where once the galaxy's leaders mocked his research. Now, they listened. Not because he had proof there was no final image, no final voice, but because something within them had changed. He had spoken to beings born from the legacy of Earth. He had walked through a floating garden in space, and he had seen the Earth itself not destroyed, not abandoned, but transformed into something pure, protected, and deeply intentional. But now, something else was beginning. It started with the stars. One by one, across different sectors, stars began to pulse, not chaotically, but rhythmically. The pulses formed a pattern. It matched human music, an ancient melody, soft, slow, full of wonder, the kind once played to children falling asleep. Scientists across the Union tried to decode it. They searched for frequencies, math patterns, navigation markers, but the answer wasn't in data. It was in emotion. The music was not a signal to find something. It was a signal to remember something. And slowly, across thousands of worlds, strange changes began. Plants long thought extinct began to grow again. Structures once built with human design, but long forgotten, lit up without warning. A massive archive ship that had drifted for centuries suddenly activated and began playing human stories in hundreds of languages. No one knew how, no one knew why, but they all felt it. The silence of Earth had passed. A new phase had begun, yet no human had returned. No figure stepped forward to take credit. There were no flags, no speeches, only presence. Varix sat in his quiet chamber and received one final visit from Lara. She did not appear as a figure this time, just light, shaped by calm thought. You searched for answers, she said, but now, your role is to become one. What do you mean? He asked. You carry the echo, not to explain, but to remind. The galaxy doesn't need more knowledge, it needs understanding. He felt the weight of those words. For so long, they had chased the idea of return, waiting for humanity to rise again and lead. But that was never the point. Earth hadn't left to create followers. They left to help others become leaders in their own right. The final message came not through speech, but through memory. All across the galaxy, people, no matter the species, age, or history, began to dream the same dream. In it, they stood, on a quiet Earth, wind blowing softly, trees from a dozen worlds swaying together. No cities, no machines, just space to think. In that dream, each person saw themselves not as rulers or victims, but as caretakers, and they woke up different. Some chose to change their ways. Others stepped down from power. Some empires, once driven by fear, opened their borders. Former enemies began to speak again, not because a great power forced them to, but because the silence had changed their hearts. That was the true legacy of humanity. Not technology, not control, but choice. The ability to pause, to think, and to choose a better way. Varix never heard from Solara again. The garden in space disappeared just like Earth, quietly, without trace. But the changes it left behind could not be erased. New alliances formed not for war, but for learning. Exploration began again, not to conquer, but to understand. Children across planets studied Terran's stories, not as tales of lost power, but as teachings of balance. One story became the most told across stars, a simple one, about a species that once spoke with fire, then learned to whisper with wisdom. They didn't vanish, they evolved beyond what others could reach, and rather than hold on to the galaxy, they let it go, to see if it would fly. Now, the galaxy was flying, not perfectly, not without struggle, but it was finally its own, and somewhere, beyond the curtain of space and time, the Earth still waited. Not as a home to return to, but as a reminder that greatness is not in being heard the loudest, it is in knowing when to be silent and let others sing.